All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I thank you so much for joining us, even though it's a bit of a delayed start. My name is Olivia. I'm a bookseller with Belmont Books, and Belmont Books, for those of you who are not familiar, is an independent and locally owned bookstore in Belmont, Massachusetts. Before we begin, I'm so glad you can all hear us. We've had just a touch of technical difficulties, but we're all here and so excited to be here. I am so excited to be here with our two wonderful authors. First, I'd like to do just a little bit of housekeeping. We have a number of excellent events coming up, including a Craft on Draft workshop tomorrow night. And on November 5th, we are joined by New York Times bestselling author Tayari Jones and Hafiza Jeter, which I'm very excited about. You can register for those and other events on our website, belmontbooks.com. And that's also where you can purchase tonight's books, A House is a Body and White Dancing Elephants, and click the link down here and you can get those books there as well. So I'm so excited to welcome Shruti Swamy and Chaya Bhuvaneswar. Shruti is a winner of 2 O. Henry Awards. Her work has appeared in the Paris Review, McSweeney's, Prairie, Schooner, and so many other places. In 2012, she was Vassar College's 50th W.K. Rose Fellow and has been awarded residencies at the Malay Colony for the Arts, Blue Mountain Center, and Hedgebrook. She joins us tonight from San Francisco. Chaya Bhuvaneswar is a physician and a writer with work in Narrative Magazine, Tin House, Electric Lit, The Millions, Joyland. We are super, super excited for both of you to join us. Your accolades just keep going. You can find Chaya on Twitter at ChayaB77, and that's where you can find other upcoming readings and events. And so without further ado, I will turn it over at last to you guys.
Well, it's such a pleasure to introduce Shruti for the launch of her book just this past summer, which is Backwards in the Mirror, but you guys, here you go. There you go. No, it's this way. This was right. A House is a Body. We're going to make the focus of tonight the launch of this wonderful new book by this wonderful author whose work I've read for years. I'm going to actually start with a reading, if that's okay, Shruti, because I just feel like people just really want to hear your words, directly from you. So we'll start with a reading. We'll get into some questions about craft in general and specific stories that I had, as well as some nonfiction writings that I've read by Shruti that she knows I've read. And then if there's time, I can read a small segment or there can be more questions, but we definitely want to leave questions for the audience for Shruti as well. So if we can hear from you first, Shruti, we would all love that.
Yes, I thank you. And I hope you can all literally hear me. So let me know if you can't. But I will also say before I start that Chaya's book, White Dancing Elephants, I've been sitting with it for a while. I got it when it came out and the right moment happened right at the beginning of the pandemic, I felt really called to read it, and was just, it's a really remarkable collection of stories too. So it's just a delight to be in conversation with you today, Chaya. I've been really looking forward to it. I would also highly recommend White Dancing Elephants, an excellent collection, just a stunning, fascinating collection of stories. So I'll read a little bit from a story called My Brother at the Station. I'll just read a little bit. I know it's kind of hard to focus on screens. So I'll just do a little bit and then we can get to questions. Okay, so this is from My Brother at the Station. This was such a crazy, we just didn't get the tech to work until just this second. So I'm just still feeling a little hectic. Because I just need to take a breath. Thank you guys all so much for coming. Okay. The next day, I saw my brother at the train station, which I normally walk by on the way to the grocery store. I was going for milk. At first, I wasn't sure that it was him, for I had been thinking about him and felt for a few moments like my thought had put a wish onto a stranger and lent him temporarily my brother's face. But not so, it was my brother. Though I had not seen him in many years, indeed, in the space of the many years since I'd seen him, he'd grown from teenager to man. His features had traveled with him to the present. the proud nose and lips that were my mother's, and his strange, far-seeing eyes. He looked rough. He had an uneven beard, and his fingernails were long. His pants, jeans were threadbare, and his camouflage jacket several sizes too large. Still, he looked better than I expected. Actually, I had not expected much. Some days I had expected him dead. I stood on the platform and watched him. He sat on a bench with an intense stillness until the train came. He did not seem to be aware of my presence. Would he look to another eye like a college student or someone without a home? When the train came, I abandoned my milk on the platform and boarded it. I got in the same car through the rear door and sat a few seats behind him so that I could see the top of his head. The train passed through the unwanted parts of towns, the backs of auto shops, the edges of mall parking lots, the dump, the impassive facades of apartment buildings that housed the poor. Even seated, my back hurt, my feet hurt, my hips were loose and tired. If I had not gotten on the train, I would have been back home by now, drinking milk while I lay in bed and read a book. As though sensing my agitation, the baby began to move inside me, a kind of turning that I found both reassuring and not very pleasant. It was the same feeling you had when a roller coaster tipped into its first ascent, or an elevator began to drop very suddenly. At that time in my pregnancy, we wore each other like a kind of weather, the child and me. My moods, I imagine, passing over her like wind or rain, and her movements wild inside me some early mornings or times when I was still, like an electrical storm. If I called my parents now, they would urge me to speak to him. They would forget what they had promised each other and beg me to offer him money, however much I had, beg him to return home. So I switched off my phone. When we pulled into the final station, I followed him off the train and onto the street, simply for the pleasure of watching him walk. The way he moved contrasted with the way I did at any time, but especially now, when pregnancy inflected my every movement, making me more clumsy and graceless. But even when my brother was a boy, he had never slouched. He walked with an unconscious trust of both his body and the world surrounding it. He never hid his fists in his pockets or the folds of his coat, each hand with the bony elegance of cats. Feet too, but those were in busted sneakers whose soles were starting to separate at the toes. His hair was feathered with grease and long past his ears. His shoulders looked narrow as a child's in his jacket. He walked up the sidewalk of a wide street, then through the press of Market, then up Eddy, where the faces of the buildings were shamefaced and sad. I was having trouble keeping pace with him, slow as I was, so tired and thirsty. It was windy but clear in the city with a low winter light. I imagined we were running a race, like when we were young, and at any moment he would turn back to smile at me. See, I'm winning. Only a few feet behind him, it seemed impossible that he would not feel my presence, but he didn't turn to look. Perhaps he didn't recognize me, remember me, think of me anymore, but I was not so sorry for myself that I allowed that thought for long. We got to a small park. He sat, then I did, choosing a bench not so far away. He brought out a cigarette and lit it. I wanted a cigarette, that cigarette, the one he held to press to my own lips. Would I love my child the way my parents loved him, or the way they loved me? It was equal, they had said. You do not love your right hand more than your left. But even then I knew it to be false. You may love your right hand less than the thrilling evanescence of lightning. Which would my child be, the hand or the lightning? Which would be easier to love, to bear? And I'll stop there.
Oh, I loved it. So I have all these questions, and I remember I read this. I think The Siege was one of the earliest stories I read of yours, and then I read this incredible essay in Catapult that we'll come back to that made me find your email and write to you. But just starting with the brother story, I did an event with Laura Vandenberg, and she was so skilled at using terms like the uncanny, and there was all this literary theory underpinning it. So you'll forgive me that I'm not going to go to that level of, expertise. But I do think that there's a very skillful and subtle handling of the uncanny in the story you just read, and I really encourage everyone buy this book, spend time, linger over that story, because there's a deceptive simplicity to the language that I think is really reminiscent of Murakami. Like before, like in the wind up, like he Wind Up Bird Chronicle book, like he's talking about somebody making spaghetti, and then all of a sudden these very weird things, like very unreal things are happening, so I guess, and I, that sense of the uncanny, like you're not even sure it's your brother at first, and then all of this kind of strangeness and estrangement. But I wanted to point out to people on page 34 of the collection, pretty maybe like a end of the first third of that story, My Brother at the Station, this wonderful sentence: slowly I started to become aware of the dead gathered in the corners of the house. I think that's, and then the narrative that follows from that. I guess I just, pointing this out and pointing out the sort of the other writers working in this terrain, like Murakami, I think like Laura as well in The Third Hotel. Can you talk about your relationship to the uncanny, whether that's something you've consciously thought about or explored, and just what you think of it, or maybe even use another word for it, but what do you think of that?
Oh, that's such a lovely reading. Thank you. Thank you, Chaya. And I like that word. I haven't heard it applied to these stories, and I really I appreciate that. Often it's described as dreamlike, and there are a lot of dreams. Definitely there are a lot of dreams in the book. But I think that maybe those are sort of speaking to similar things, but we're also in sort of a spooky season right now. Uncanny has kind of a little bit of a darker edge than dreamlike does, or it feels a little bit darker and maybe more complicated than dreamlike. So I really like that word. I think that I was interested unconsciously at first, and then more consciously as I saw these stories together, or was pulling things, like when in editing, pulling things out, and the porousness of reality, and not to the point where something familiar becomes completely strange, but just that edge where a dream penetrates reality, or like this uncanny. And I like the dead are penetrating the story, and we're not in the world of the dead, and we're not fully in the world of the living. That a lot of these stories take place on the edge, the places where those worlds touch. Why was I so interested in that? Because I think that that's like our experience of being alive, isn't it? I mean, it's kind of like literalizing this experience of like, we are living in the world of the dead, in ways that we like, the people we love are, if we collapse time a little bit, we're already dead. The people we love are already dead, and we're still alive. We're walking around with the knowledge of that. We're walking around.
Our cells are dying every day.
Yeah, our cells are dying every day. Our world our world is dying and reshaping itself every day in very serious ways and very like dramatic ways right now. But always that was the case, that there is a constant. We are living in the world of the dead, and that's just our condition. And so, in these stories, by kind of letting my characters inhabit both of those spaces, I just am talking about this feeling that you sometimes have when great moments of upheaval in one's life, I think, that happen in birth or death, when you're in the presence of birth or death, where you suddenly remember that you're a human body, mortal and with a soul, that's the place you remember it, is between those two worlds. So that was something that, even though these stories are like mostly realist, or not like fully realist, but mostly realist, I think that's something that they're all kind of interested in.
What a beautiful answer. I mean, I would say too that there's certain kinds of fiction where the uncanny feels like just literary, and just like it's an excursion, and it's someone saying, "Oh, I feel like just writing something very dark and weird and tingly to my character." And I think what really distinguishes this story as well as the work is that somehow we do also get the colors of grief and fear and love, and emotion, that the way that these parents are trying to cope with whatever is happening to this brother, and then also the beautiful sense of uncertainty about, and tell me if I interpreted this wrongly, but that, the narrator is pregnant and also doesn't know whether that weight of the grief is going to be carried forward if this is something hereditary. Like I kind of read that as a little bit of a biological read into this whole territory of the uncanny and the unknown. And that, yeah, I mean, was that accurate? Was that a way to understand some of her uncertainty? Did you think about any of that, or tell me anything else that I'm sure I missed in the first or second reading of it?
Oh no, that's beautiful, Chaya. I think that wasn't actually something I had thought of, like that feeling of inheritance, like literally biological inheritance, and something that she would carry to her child. But it's a really I think that there's some of these stories more than others, and this story maybe in particular, there is a lot of spaciousness in the story. I'm not drawing the lines so explicitly. I'm not underlining things as much as I could be, because I want, like, that's like really feels good to me that you stepped into that story with your imagination and pulled that thread out. I think it's there, even though I didn't necessarily put it in there, you know what I mean? Because I think it's really, that's been one of the pleasures of having this book out into the world, and maybe experience this too, where I sort of feel like these stories aren't really mine anymore, or like if you're reading patiently and carefully, which you absolutely are, then that your reading is kind of as good as mine, because I don't have like a special authority on it anymore. I just have like the things I was thinking about. But yeah, I really like that. Yeah, this story, I wrote this story over the course of many, many years. I started it in like 2010 or even earlier than that, and brought it to a workshop. And my wonderful professor was like, the ending really isn't working. It's like, you're doing some cool stuff in here, but the ending really isn't working, and you'll know how to fix it. And I was like, I think the ending is working, so whatever. Peter Orner, incredible short story genius. Like, you're wrong on this one. And then like maybe a year later, I pulled it out again and was like, oh yeah, I guess the ending like really isn't working. I don't know, but I don't know what to do about it. And then even years and years and years. This wasn't in the manuscript when I sold the collection, and pulled it out of the drawer and was like, yeah, I see the ending isn't working, and I think I know what to do now. So maybe like, 8 years had elapsed from the time I'd written the first draft. And in that time, I'd written 8 more years worth of work. So I think my understanding of language was better. I was technically a little bit better, but also I'd had a child, and I'd literally been pregnant. And so that informed the physicality of the character, but I think that I had a different understanding of what it might mean to be pregnant in that moment. So I was able to write a new ending. That was extremely instructive. It's almost like, no story is ever lost. You can always come back. I mean, this has not been always true, but if there's something like that moves you in that story.
I've heard Maylee Malloy said something similar about a bunch of stories she found in a closet that she had written 12 or 15 years before.
Oh, that's so nice.
These make sense to me now. Yeah. But I do want to move to, since you've brought it up, and it's in the story, but it's also in a flash piece of yours that I read in the Cincinnati Review, and it's elsewhere. Pregnancy, motherhood. I think there's a really striking and compelling physicality that you have when you write about these experiences in a way that I think it's very fresh. And part of why it's fresh is you sense the agency of this person, this being. This being that either is inside you or just came out and you're holding it, him or her. And I just wondered if, partly as a transition a little bit out of strictly craft into the writing life, if you can talk about pregnancy, motherhood, kind of as a literary influence, and also just, any other practical impact it's had on you as a writer.
Oh, such a great, I really like that framing of it being a literary influence. Yeah. Yeah. I wrote this story. So this collection was completely done before I had given birth or even been pregnant. So I did do some editing on it, after I had given birth, and my brother at the station being the most, substantial edits. The rest of them were pretty light because they'd been worked over so much over the years. And I'm working on a novel right now. I'm kind of in the final stages of editing that novel that is also a lot about I was writing that novel. There's a long section in the novel where my character is pregnant, and I was pregnant. She's like pregnant and hating it. And I was also pregnant and hating it, which you think would be like the best way to write that. But I was just like, get me out of here. I can't even escape this in my imagination.
Right. My life on the page.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. I really feel curious about that. And Chaya, I think you have kids too. Is that right? Yeah, so maybe I'll ask that to you too, because I've been wondering. I mean, my child is only 2 years old right now, so I almost feel like, as is with any major event or reshaping of my body and my language and my identity, or my identity and all of those things, that it takes. There's like a moment of impact, and then over the years, things will become evident to me. I definitely started writing more immediately after my daughter was born. What little writing I did do was about her fictionally or non-fictionally. I found it fascinatingly physical to be in relation with this person who has no language and is interacting with you like an animal, and you are an animal. And that was like really an exciting thing to think about through language, because it was an experience that existed outside of language. It transcended language, or like it bypassed it completely, So that's something that in the immediate aftermath of that, I was writing a lot about newborns and like nursing and pregnancy. So that was a direct influence. And I think that experience is really valuable as a writer. It's like really good, like a really good life experience, sort of, to have the physical knowledge of those things. But I am really curious, and I wonder if you felt this. Do you feel like motherhood has reshaped your approach to language? Because that's something for me that I'm wondering if it will. And so far, I feel like it's too early to tell. I'm like a new mom, so I can't tell if there's any difference in my language. But I just wonder, have you found that to be true for you?
I do think that's true. And I think what's interesting is, I would say it gave me more confidence in my language, because however imperfect a mother's language is, it has to get it done, right? Like I always sort of feel like, well, I might not be saying the right way why you have to go to bed at this time because you need to get up, but someone's going to say it, and I'm here, so it'll be me. So I think, I think it's a general confidence, but I do want to just, for writers in the audience, I do want to kind of hone in on just how, if you can just talk a little generally about your development as a writer and where you would situate the immediate, event of pregnancy, motherhood, those changes, but just your development as a writer, even from a professional perspective, how everyone always wants, how did you get published? What did you do? So anything you want to say about that you think is interesting. And then I want to get to the siege as my last question, because I'm obsessed with that story.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that. That's a great question. I have to say, I mean, hilariously, I think that I used to think of myself when I was, I studied English in undergrad and with a creative writing focus, and then I did my MFA, and I was fine. I think when I look back on my writing from that age, I don't think it was terrible. I think that I was really interested in had a very lyric sensibility, to a fault. And so you could definitely see that there was something there. but it wasn't very good. I just really want to be frank about that. Like, that was probably the time I thought that I was like the best, like that's like the highest self-confidence I've ever had in my writing, I think, was when I was like 22. And I was like, I'm just a wonderkind. Like, just watch me go, you know. And actually,
there was this interview with Akhil Sharma. I don't know if you've seen it, where like Time magazine or something interviewed him when he was pretty young, like at 28 or something, 27, 28. And he said, I think I'm quite good, actually, or something like really, really funny. Like, I think I'm quite good, really better than most people. So
it's really like somehow heartening to hear.
Normal, like to feel that way. Sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to.
I really love knowing that. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's like a kind of like innocent arrogance that you sort of, but then it's like it's almost like you're fuel or something. Like, you have to have that level of like delusion about your own work in order to like propel you through all of the like stuff that you're going to have, like all the rejections, and also just all of the like work that you're going to have to do to actually get better. Like, there has to be some level of being like, I am so talented and gifted. It's a blessing. In order to like, when you're not that good yet, in order for you to continue until you can like refine your skills. So I wrote all through college and graduate school. And then basically I did this like crazy thing that I don't necessarily recommend, I guess, although it worked for me. But I just like, now that I've seen so many other people and the ways that they've gotten published, I just think like, I don't know if I needed to do all that. Or I just like super, super aggressively submitted my stories to literary magazines, like very aggressively. And until they took me. Like, I had a 100 rejection challenge with my best friend who's a poet and essayist. And we had like a shared Google document, and we would just we were trying to get to 100 rejections. And through that, and that's when I got this like very aggressive mindset. And it really, I mean, in some ways it really worked. Like, I got 100 rejections. I got like a very small handful of acceptances, but those acceptances I felt like were that the journals that just weren't even looking at my work would then look at my work. So then I got published in like higher tier journals. And then out of the ether, like a bolt of, you know, just like a bolt of, like of lucky lightning. I was, one of my stories was chosen for the O. Henry, but you know, because you're a short story, like, because I'm a short story writer, and Chaya probably, or I don't know if you promised that you would work on a longer piece, or if you were just like, here I go, I'm only writing short stories. At the time I was only writing short stories. I wasn't even interested in writing a longer piece. And then nobody wants you then. They're all like, get back to me when you have a longer piece. Except for a few, like ultimately, I was represented by, my agent did want me. And there were a couple people who were like, then you can kind of like be like, this person's interested in this person or whatever. And I got, just like through absolutely sheer luck, a wonderful agent who is actually interested in representing short story collections, and has several clients who are women of color. So it was like luck. It was also like a lot of like dumb work. Like, I don't think that you really, like, I think you could just publish in a few places and then start querying agents. But I don't know, you just maybe, or you like have a cool novel idea, which I didn't have at the time. Then you can also do it that way. Oh no, Chaya, now I can't hear you. Oh, Chaya, I still can't hear you, but you're muted. You say you're muted now. I still can't hear you. Oh no, there's like a bar at the top that has like do you see that like toggle mic at the top? I think that might be all it is. Oh no. It's muted now. Oh, we still can't hear you. Well, maybe why don't we see if there's any questions from the audience, and then, Chaya's reconnecting. Well, in the meantime, if there's any questions from the audience, you can just feel free to drop those in. Otherwise, I can keep talking. What can I talk about?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, definitely. And okay, so the audience was saying that there was a bad echo and I was muted, but you can hear me now, right, Shruti?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly.
Wonderful. So audience, please let us know if the echo is terrible, but I'm afraid to unplug this because then it'll go on mute. I'm so sorry about that bad echo of before, but I do want to go, I don't want to, I want to talk about the siege, and I would like to read maybe like 3 minutes from my collection, and then I want to open it up. I'm watching the time very carefully. I want to open it up to audience because I love the questions that usually come out for Shruti or whoever is launching. So the siege, I see that as in a very unique way within the context of a retold epic. I thought, tell me if I'm wrong in thinking it was the Ramayana versus, okay, good. And I saw it as kind of uniquely opening up possibilities between women in terms of their relationship and the way that they think about each other or feel about each other. And I feel like I have read other stories of yours. I have to look if I read it in this collection or just read it online, but I feel like I've read queer stories from you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so
yeah,
I just wanted to sort of find out from you, where do you think those kind of categorizations like queer identity or so on fit with this mythic sense of physicalizing war and opening up spaces, interesting, intimate spaces between women and all of that? Like how do you connect those things? Because I love that connection of these sort of bold new identities with epics that are literally thousands of years old. I wondered if you could speak to that.
Oh, thank you. That's such a great question. Yeah, I think that I am really just in general I just love writing and thinking about relationships between women. And I do think that there is I think I have no objection to the term queer, and I also don't think that it's an incorrect reading of that story. But I think that there's a space. I think I'm just really interested in this space that opens between, especially two women, that has no name, and it's like almost to put a kind of identity on it is. It feels like, I think maybe there's like this private thing that happens, that there's like an intimacy that happens between women that is so ambiguous and is physical also, and I'm really interested in that. How much we admire, like how women can admire each other and what that admiration looks like, and how they can like love each other in ways that are platonic and not, because it's so intense, that kind of love. And this just, it's like, are they friends or are they, lovers, that there's some space in the or rivals, or there's some really fascinating. And it's funny that it came up in this story sort of because and that's kind of what your question is saying. Like, that's, to me, that's like just something I've been thinking about with like modern female friendships. But I also thought in cultures or in times where there was absolutely no like we have that concept of queerness. So when we are in relation now, we just, even if it doesn't, you're like, oh, that doesn't necessarily, I'm not queer, or that doesn't apply to us, this is a platonic friendship. You're like, no, you know what I mean? Like that you almost like have to put a name on it. Make it one thing or the other. And I think this story was interesting to me because I wanted maybe there was a conception of queerness that I wasn't aware of, but I kind of like this idea where two people could navigate a relationship that had no precedent and could just be what it was to each other. And I think that those, so I'm just saying, like, those terms are really important politically, and I really value them. So it's like, no, I'm not like trying to say they're not queer. Like, they totally are queer if we want to look at it like that. I love that idea. But I think I'm just in the same way. It's a very porous sense. And I think just loving somebody and loving them like you love all of them, you love their bodies, you know, when you love a friend really deeply. And what does that mean? And where does that cross into sexual territory? I find that really fascinating. I love writing about it. Yeah, and your book too, I think, is exploring that territory pretty in many ways. So I would love to hear you. I would love to hear you read from it. It would be wonderful.
That is so generous. And so I will say, before doing that, and I think the echo is back, so I do apologize. Shruti's book is out now. A house is a body. Please don't be upside down. It is up. No, it's mirror reverse to me, but not to you. So that's good. It's a beautiful, beautiful book. If you are in the audience and you've not bought it, please do. And please look out for her novel, The Archer. And I challenge someone in the audience in the chat to ask her about the novel in the Q&A section. So the story I'm going to read, like maybe 2 pages from, is called Talinda from White Dancing Elephants. And it very much is about physicality and possibility within a friendship of women. So Talinda. So here I am, sitting in the doctor's waiting room, hoping no one talks to me or intuits why I'm fat, when the door that says on the outside, "Do not enter," swings open, and Talinda storms out, not long for this world. The young blonde nurse stands there, bracing the open door with one hand, holding a clipboard with the other. "We should have the results back any day," she calls, though it's obvious my best friend isn't listening. "Later this week, do check," her voice wafts out, like she's a woman working in a shop, not an announcer of life versus death. Not long for this world. Don't say things like that, I would have pleaded with Talinda if she had said the words out loud, one of her usual angry and dapper turns of phrase. "Oh, you'll fight this thing," I said when she first told me that she had stomach cancer, and for once she nodded, not ridiculing the cliché. But that was a year ago, before I became this wretched person, a woman sleeping with her best friend's husband, a woman waiting to take over a life. "Aren't you full of surprises, Miss Narika?" Talinda would have said. "You're not as boring as I thought," if she had known. But Talinda doesn't know what her husband and I are capable of. Cancer is what she's come to know, how its cells lived as shameless parasites of the body, the dark and mocking children who'd never leave home. Talinda could caution you about genes that whispered false instructions, genes speaking louder and louder over rivers of gushing new blood vessels, these rivers mindless and cruel as they crossed in confusing directions of their own, greedily serving cells of destruction. This is Talinda Kim and what she's been given, age 37, Korean American, born to a waitress in Flushing, board-certified internist and geriatrician, married, no children, signet cell gastric carcinoma, stage 4, prognosis 6 months. 6 months. If I weren't betraying Talinda, I'd use what I know for her benefit. My arm around her shoulder, I'd describe Aubrey Lord's cancer journals, her dignity, her hope, and then Talinda would be forced, as usual, to turn on me with her mix of affection and contempt. The potent and honest combination that I've always counted on. She might say, "Narika, you don't win any points for reading some poor woman's private diary whose problems you can't even understand to begin with. Amazing how you're trying to read books for a living. At some point, you have to stop going to school and get a job. At some point, you have to accept it. The real world isn't made of poetry." I think I'll stop there because I'm watching the time for our questions. And
I know we only have a little bit of time, but Chaya, can I just ask you one question, please?
yes, definitely.
Something that I was really struck by in this collection and that I thought was just really like exhilarating, and I don't know if I'd really seen before. And Talinda's a really good example. Another example is a shaker chair, that there's relationships that you are writing of. You do have often characters who are of Indian descent, but you also, in these, they're having relationships with other women of color, with other privileges. And sometimes, I think that there's this like way when you're writing about solidarity, when you're writing about women of color, you want to show this, like, we're all in it together. We're all like, there's so much solidarity. And there's a lot of conflict in these relationships. They're very complicated relationships, and they're not all rosy. And they are really picking apart the idea that because women could be all categorized, these characters could be categorized as women of color, that they're all the same and they're all on each other's side completely and uncomplicatedly. That feels like really terrifying and thrilling. And the ways that you like, there's racism and bigotry, and there's different negotiations of power, there's rivalry, there's jealousy, and deep love also in some cases. So I just wanted to know how that became part of your focus, and was that scary, and how did you approach it?
I mean, I'm sure we'll talk more in the future. And I also want to direct people's attention to Shruti's creative nonfiction, which is beautiful. There's an essay on the Catapult website about swimming that I really recommend. While you're waiting for the collection to be delivered to your home, get on the website, read that essay. It's just gorgeous. But anyway, I will answer concisely. I think it's a radical act for us as women of color to demand to be fully fleshed on the page. To be dirty, ugly, mean, petty, ambitious, cunning, courageous, just to fully be as much as any other type of character or type of person. And I think the short story form in particular feels very liberating to fully explore. And I really appreciated the words you used on Twitter, fascinating and wild collection of stories. And I think it succeeded, if that's what it is, because that's the way humans are. That's the way we are. So with that, and a thank you for giving me the time to read, we would love to take questions. And I see 2 questions, and I don't see our moderator. And so this is a beautiful question for Shruti. Shruti, I'm amazed, and I'm looking for the person's name, and I'm not seeing it. So I do apologize. If this is your question, if you put your name in the chat, we will shout you out, because it's a beautiful question. I'm amazed by the compassion you have for your characters, even in their most unattractive moments, and I'm grateful for how you inspire me to hold compassion for them too. Thank you. In contrast, our nonfiction world seems to be really struggling with compassion right now. I wonder if you can talk about this, how this contrast impacts your life and or work at this particular moment.
Oh, what a question. Yeah, I think that there's, I don't know. I don't know exactly how I hold those two things together. I will say that I wrote this collection really trying to understand, in some cases, I mean, not literally, I wasn't literally writing about my family, but I think that in some cases was writing questions to understand why people made choices that they did, or what it might be like to be in these certain situations. They were questions of love. So maybe what I'm saying is that I think compassion, the beginning of compassion is curiosity. And that I was really curious, and not maliciously curious from an open-hearted way, to know what it might feel like to experience these things, or to explore, if I had experienced them in whatever way I did, to be able to communicate that. I was curious about how I could communicate that. So I don't know, because I feel like, especially at the beginning of the election, or right after the election last time, there was a huge call to be like, but what about white rural voters? Like, what about people who are experiencing economic anxiety? Let's empathize with them. Let's tell their stories. And I felt a lot of fatigue around that, where I was like, why am I being expected to be compassionate towards them if they're not being, they have no interest in me. They're not exercising their compassion towards me. So I don't quite know how to reconcile that, but I think that a writer's job ultimately is to be curious about people and to love them. And I don't know if I'm really imaginatively allowing myself. I think there's also some protection that one has to have when they're a woman of color, or if they're any kind of minority that is kind of under, I mean, we're all under assault right now just because of the way that our government is being run. But there has to be some measure of self-protection and the places that you can take yourself. So you have to be ready to take yourself there. And I'm not quite ready in some cases because it's too scary for me to allow myself to go there, I think. But I think ultimately writing can be and reading too can be an act of incredible, I don't know, I think empathy, definitely empathy and compassion, but that but I think those words are often used and in the context of reading and writing. And what I mean is they can open something for us. Like they can open experiences, they can open people to us. And that's a really loving and generous act and probably a restorative act if we can keep doing it. And if we can also keep ensuring that we're listening to all kinds of stories and that we're advocating for all sorts of stories to be told.
But even your use of the word open kind of reminds me of what you were saying earlier about porousness. You know, I really like this. And so I will say that the only other question is kind of funny. It's, are there nuts and mini Gatorades in the green room? And the answer is yes. Yes, there are. Actually, there are. Actually, there are. But I would really like to know more. I'm thinking that, oh, good, there's another question. Yes, I read your, and again, I can't see who this is from. I'm so sorry. Oh, no, maybe it's from Chris. Yes, I think it's from Chris. I read your collection this summer, and every so often, I wonder what your characters are up to these days. Do you ever think about your characters in this way, like actual people you once knew, and wonder what they're doing nowadays? I love that question.
Chris, such a nice question. Thank you. I wrote this book a really long time ago. So at this point, everybody's totally dead to me. Everybody's often like living, they're not alive in my imagination anymore in the same way that they used to be. But I think that when I'm working on it, or like just when I'm finished with the story, I'm definitely thinking about them. And I'm working on a novel right now, and I do feel like there's one character in my novel who I have been, actually it was because very embarrassingly late did I realize that this character was not Brahmin, and might be, this is a book that's set in India, and that her caste might have actually totally inflected her experience in ways that I was not aware of and needed to do research about. And so once I started doing that and thinking about her, I've been thinking about her a lot. And I think there's just so much that's not going to make it into the book, I think, just in terms of her backstory and what she's doing when she's not on camera, that I think I'm going to live with her for a long time. I wish that I could. I don't know, Chaya, if you've been able to do this. I feel like I've never been able to write more than one story about a person. Like once I've written about them, that's all that my imagination can hold of them. So I don't know if I'll ever really write about her. Are you able to do that? Do you hold on to characters after
I don't know. I think it really varies. And I love that question because I do kind of know, I'm working on a novel as well. It hasn't gone out yet. So, it's not, I don't have a date or anything. It's not done. But, I do kind of think I'd really like to know what happened if these two people walked off together, from this larger ensemble cast of characters. But that said, there's one more question. But before I go to that, I would really like to ask you, Shruti, could you please tell us about your novel? You've alluded to it, and it's very tantalizing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I would be happy to talk about it. And I would also love to hear about your novel, Chaya. My novel is called The Archer. It's coming out in September of next year, which is very soon. And it is about a young woman who's coming of age in Bombay in the 1960s and 70s. She's a Kathak dancer, which is a kind of incredibly intricate, kind of mathematical almost and very precise form of Indian classical dance that is characterized by just astonishing footwork. And if anybody's interested, there's just like some really amazing YouTube videos that you can go down a rabbit hole watching. They're so amazing. Very fast.
Yeah.
So she's coming of age and she is kind of trying to negotiate her identity and assert her identity as an artist in a society that's maybe not very amenable to that, and also navigating a traumatic early childhood and a very complicated relationship with her mother as she looks to motherhood herself. And what about you, Chaya? Do you want to talk about it yet?
Incredible.
You don't have to if you don't want to.
No, I can. It's at a stage where I can talk about it a little bit, and I will say that at the center is a queer coming of age story, but set in the 1980s in Queens, in New York, and in some ways building on a real life case of there's the structure within the diaspora community, or many diaspora communities, but certainly the South Asian one, where more experienced immigrants really exploit less experienced immigrants, right? I mean, trafficking and so on. So it's kind of built around that, but in 1980s Queens, New York, with the narrator, a queer South Asian woman who's not that different from some of the women in the short story collection. So I think, though, that someone else may be asking about Shruti's upcoming novel, September 2021. And is that correct? It's called The Archer?
The Archer, yeah.
Excellent. And the next question is, so the next question is sort of for us both, but I'm selfishly going to ask Shruti to give us a list. What are some books you guys are reading to help you keep afloat right now? I like that question.
Oh yeah, I should have had it. I should have had something in my brain. I'm reading right now. I don't know if I'm reading anything to keep afloat. I think I'm just reading to read, because to have something to do. But there's nothing that I'm reading right now that, well, I don't know. What am I reading right now to keep afloat? Well, I just finished reading The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. Just one big gulp. That is a book I read to keep afloat. It was so, it was both like just a complete delicious page turner and also like just a joyous celebration of America, like the diversity of America and American immigrants. That was the last book that I read that I just really loved. What about you, Chaya?
I am in the spirit of, just for our audience, please, please, please support indie booksellers, right? There's saving them from the box and all of the background of it. So I'm going to take this as these are other books you can buy. You can bundle Shruti's book, perhaps my book, but all these other books too, and do your holiday shopping. I think N.K. Jemisin, amazing. And if people kind of want to dig into how is there an N.K. Jemisin and why did it take so long for there to be an N.K. Jemisin when Octavia Butler was born 20 years before and was like the only one for many, many years, right? Why did it take so long? And by the way, Kindred is amazing too. I read Kindred. I was kind of blown away by that. I really recommend. It is structurally so astonishing. And I actually think that the Underground Railroad owes a lot to Octavia Butler. And we won't go into that right now. What's his name? Colson Whitehead's book, which is brilliant, but we won't go into the debts involved in that. And I think a really tremendously important book to read is Minor Feelings by Kathy Hong Park. and I will write that too. And the bookseller is helpfully including all these links to buy these books. But I think the really interesting thing about Kathy Hong Park's book is that it grounds a lot of subterranean Asian American history. About the author of Dictee, this Korean American woman who was brutally raped and murdered, and just all this history that's suppressed of violence against Asian Americans. It grounds it in her personal anecdotes that are actually very down to earth and funny, and not unlike some of what we find in Shruti's fiction of like the ordinary. Like I just love that line in the brother story in the beginning where the narrator says, "Whoever wants to be a big sister?" And I'm that's such a good line. So those are some good books, and I'm going to see if there are any other questions.
One book I just thought of while you do that is this is a reread, but Camille Dungy's Guidebook to Relative Strangers, which is a memoir about her becoming a mother. And they're not all about motherhood, I think, but most of them are. And honestly, I was reading in bed a couple nights ago, and I had read it before even. I had like read this essay before and remembered it, and like moved me to tears. So that's another beautiful one. She's a poet, but this is a work of prose. It's very beautiful.
Excellent. Well, we're kind of at time, and to the very wonderful people who attended, thank you. And please, please, please do not miss this book. I mean, it's always really heartening when the short story lives. When the short story is alive and really grabs us. And this book showed up on so many best of summer reading lists. Shruti interviewed by BuzzFeed, Electric Lit, all over the place. Really don't miss this book, and don't miss her novel that's coming out in fall of 2021. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Chaya. Such a delight to talk to you.
Have a good night. Bye.
Good night, everybody.